Hi, this is Doug Standard with fearlesspresentations.com again. In this session, we're going to talk about being persuasive. That's one of the main things that people come to the Fearless Presentations class for, is to help them win people to their way of thinking, or to be persuasive in their communication. And there are a couple of really simple things that, if you keep them in mind when you're giving your presentations, it can really help you kind of diffuse difficult situations, as well as be more persuasive when you speak. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background about how the human brain thinks. Anytime we give people advice, anytime we tell people what they need to think or what they need to do, there's an automatic wall that kind of builds up in the human psyche. And even if we agree with the person, by the way, we'll still be a little resistant. We want to play devil's advocate. We want to poke holes in it, that kind of thing. So most of the time, folks think that the best way to persuade somebody is to give them a few facts. And if that doesn't persuade them, give them a few more facts. And if that doesn't work, you give them a few more and a few more and a few more. And what ends up is kind of an argumentative kind of thing. And another thing that will tend to happen a lot of times in speeches, especially if you're giving a longer presentation, is every once in a while somebody might interrupt you with a question, and sometimes that question might be designed to kind of throw you off or to put you in a defensive posture, that kind of thing. Anytime you answer one of those questions with facts or figures, basically what you're doing is you're kind of proving to the other person that he or she is wrong. And so what's going to almost always happen is you're going to end up with a follow-up question. So keeping that in mind, it's a whole lot easier to kind of persuade somebody if you give them an example before you give them the advice. Back in the early 1920s, 1930s, Dale Carnegie, he was one of the first guys to really create a public speaking class. And one of the things that he used to teach people was that there was a magic formula. And he said if you start with a story or an example and then give somebody a piece of advice, they're more likely to listen to you. And he wasn't the first to come up with this, by the way. I read the Bible once, and in the Gospels in the Bible, Jesus uses parables to teach people. And so basically what a parable is just a story that he was using as an analogy sometimes, but sometimes as a personal example, in order to win people to his way of thinking. Aesop's fables when we're kids. Remember, at the end of every one of those Aesop's fables, it was always, the moral of the story is. Tell the story first, then give them the moral. And so if you start your piece of advice or start your persuasive speech with an example, people are more likely to not only pay attention to you, but actually more likely to do what you ask them to do. I'll give you an example of this. For instance, when I bring new salespeople on in my company, and let's say I want to teach them to start their sale, because they can create their own schedule and that kind of thing, which has a lot of freedom, but also has a lot of challenges as well. When you have that freedom, sometimes people will start to not start their day at the earliest. And so what I'll typically do is give them examples of how they can make more money if they start making phone calls early. For instance, the very first real formal sales job that I had, sitting at an office anyway, I worked for a big training company in Dallas, and very first day I had no idea. I lived in Arlington, Texas, and I was driving to Dallas, so it's about maybe 15 miles, 20 miles or so, but I had no idea how long it was going to take me in traffic, so I ended up actually getting to the office about 7:30 in the morning, and the office didn't really open until 8. But I kind of noticed, so I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, and I kind of noticed that the light was on in the sales office. My first day, I have no idea if the door's going to be open or not, but I go and I push the door open. Inside the sales office was one guy. His name was Norm, and Norm kind of was surprised when he saw me. He says, you're the new guy, right? And I kind of introduced myself to him, and he introduced himself to me. And he said, hey, you're going to do pretty well here. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, just the fact that you're starting your day early. He said I make more money before everybody else gets in the office than most of them make all day. And I was like, oh, great, kind of good piece of advice anyway. So I worked with Norm for I would say about 5 or 6 months or so. And eventually Norm retired. But I basically, since I had gotten there at 7:30 that morning, and there were times that I kind of left the house a little bit later, and I ended up getting there at 8:30, 9, that kind of thing. So I kind of figured out that I had this little sweet spot in my driving time, that if I left at a certain time, I'd still get there by 7:30. So I just kind of made it a habit. I was kind of getting there about an hour or so before everybody else, except for Norm. That day that Norm retired, though, he came up to me. It was a Friday afternoon, and he said, "Hey, Doug," he said, "I know that you got a good work ethic. I've seen over the last few months you've made a lot of sales, and you're starting to kind of real big headway with the company and everything. He said, "What I want to encourage you though to keep coming in early in the morning because you haven't really hit that sweet spot yet, but you will. You're going to get it to start making some really good money." And I kind of took it with a grain of salt. I've been coming in that early in the morning anyway, so I hadn't really hit the wealth or anything, so I wasn't really sure exactly what he was talking about. But Monday morning, I came in same time, 7:30 or so. Yeah, nothing really happened. Tuesday morning, same thing. Wednesday morning, though, I got there just a couple minutes earlier. I was there about 7:25, and just as I was kind of putting my stuff at my desk, all of a sudden the phone rings. And when Norm was working with me, anytime the phone would ring, he would kind of pick it up, and I was always appreciative of that because I was getting my stuff ready for a day's work and all that kind of stuff. So I went ahead and kind of, since I was the only one there, I picked up the phone, and it turned out it was the CEO of a big company in Dallas that was actually looking for some sales training, and just happened to be the only guy in the office to answer the phone. And it was funny because on the phone call, he asked me if we did sales training. I said yes, and he said, "Hey, can you send somebody out to kind of talk to us about it? We're interested in sending about 30 of our guys through a training course." And I was doing the regular sales thing, which was I was giving him two choices. Since it was Wednesday, I said, "Well, would tomorrow be good or next Tuesday be better?" He said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I'll be there in 30 minutes, right?" So anyway, hung up the phone, put my tie on, got out in the car, drove down there. I was at this guy's office by about 8 o'clock, and by 8:30 I'd signed a $30,000 contract with this guy. And what was interesting though was that in the next 3 weeks I had 3 more contracts just like that, or actually 3 totals, but 3 total contracts in the first 3 weeks that were all from people that called me early in the morning. And what I kind of figured out was that the people who are like the bigwigs, the movers and shakers in industry, a lot of them get their work done, their busy work especially, done early in the morning. So what I started doing was I started making my outbound phone calls at the same time. I would start making my outbound phone calls at 7:30 in the morning, and more often than not, the CEOs, the presidents of the companies, were actually answering their own phones. Whereas if I called them at 9 o'clock, I got voicemail, right? So anyway, I started making a whole lot of money. So my advice to you is to start your day early in the morning. If you do, you're going to make a whole lot more sales. So basically, I kind of tell my sales guys a quick little story like that as a way to encourage them to start making phone calls early in the morning, because what I kind of find is that if they work really, really hard for 2, 3, 4 hours in the morning, a lot of times they can take it really easy on the rest of the day. So it's a really good kind of way to persuade people, win people to your way of thinking. So start with a story, and then once you finish with a story, give them a moral of the story or a piece of advice. And it works in a lot of different situations, not just in presentations, but also in when you're dealing with your kids or coworkers, or anytime that you're trying to persuade people. When you're giving this in a presentation, though, a lot of times when somebody will interrupt you, I kind of mentioned before that when somebody interrupts you with a question, if you feel like they're trying to put you on the defensive, instead of just coming right out and answering the question and giving your advice to them or your opinion to them, which will likely get you into an argument, at first start off with a quick little example or story. It doesn't have to be a 2 or 3 minute example like I gave. It could be a 10-second example, but then give them the piece of advice. They're much more likely to abide by kind of what you're talking about. So start with a story, start with an example, and then give your advice, and people are more likely to pay attention to you. Another tip from Fearless Presentations.